My ex-business partner filed for bankruptcy and tried to blame me for the company's collapse. In court, he said, she made poor decisions. I quietly presented emails showing his reckless spending, including luxury trips and personal purchases. His lawyer had no defense. For years, I poured my heart into my business. Blood, sweat, and sleepless nights. It was my everything. And then Brad burned it all to the ground. How it all started. I started a marketing agency from scratch with Brad, my business partner. We were just two people who had nothing but grit and ambition. We worked insane hours, chasing clients, pulling all-nighters, grinding through weekends, eating cheap takeout at our desks. We did everything ourselves: design, copywriting, pitching, invoicing. No assistants, no accountants, no office. Just two overworked idiots trying to make something out of nothing. And we did. After years of struggling, things started taking off. Clients rolled in. Money came in. We went from scrambling for projects to turning down work because we had too much demand. We finally hired staff. We got an office. We made it. Then Brad started acting different. When the money changed him. At first, it was small things. A fancy dinner here. A $200 bottle of wine there. Gotta impress the clients, he said. Fine. Whatever. Then it escalated. He started booking first-class flights to business meetings. Except there were no meetings, just him lounging in Miami, drinking on the company card. He bought a $5,500 Rolex, called it networking expenses. He booked a week in Cancun at a 5-star resort. No work calls. No meetings. No clients. Just pictures of him on Instagram, drinking cocktails by the pool. Every time I confronted him, he waved me off. You gotta spend money to make money. Relax, we're making more than enough. This is how business works. No, Brad. This is how you work. The breaking point. I ignored it for too long. I was busy actually running the business, making sure our team got paid, handling client projects, doing real work. Then one night, I checked our financials. I had to read them 3 times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. We were hemorrhaging money. $12,000, client retreat, aka Brad's solo vacation to Cancun. $5,500, luxury watch investment, the Rolex. $3,000, networking event, VIP bottle service at a club. $8,000 plus, random Uber Black rides and 5-star hotel stays. And no actual business expenses. No ads, no new hires, no tools, no investments. Just Brad living like he was some kind of hedge fund millionaire. I lost it. I stormed into our office, put the financial statements in front of him, and said, "Explain this." He barely looked up. "Dude, chill." "Chill? Yeah, man. This is normal. Business owners do this all the time." I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. He was dead serious. I asked him one last time, "Are you going to stop?" He laughed. "Bro, we're making more money than ever. You need to stop being so uptight." I made my decision right there. I wanted out. I spent the next few months quietly preparing my exit. I hired a lawyer. I gathered every financial record I could find. I documented everything, every reckless purchase, every ignored warning, every sketchy transfer. I lined up a new job so I wouldn't be stranded. And then I left. I sold my shares, got my name off every legal document, and walked away. It wasn't easy. I had built that company from the ground up. But I knew one thing for sure: Brad was going to run it into the ground. I just didn't think he'd try to take me down with it. The lawsuit. 8 months later, I woke up to legal documents in my inbox. Brad had filed for bankruptcy. And he was blaming me for it. The lawsuit claimed that I had made bad business decisions. That I had driven away clients. That I had financially mismanaged the company. I sat there, reading the pages, feeling my hands shake with rage. He wasn't just trying to escape responsibility. He was trying to pin everything on me. But the worst part? People believed him. Brad started posting on LinkedIn and Facebook, acting like he was the victim. Talking about how his ex-business partner's poor decisions led to the company collapsing. He made it sound like I had stolen from the company. Some of our old employees messaged me. They were confused, asking what had really happened. Clients stopped responding to my emails. My reputation was at risk. I was done being quiet. The court battle. First, I hired the best lawyer I could afford. Then I gathered my evidence. Emails warning him about his spending. Bank statements showing his luxury purchases. Screenshots of him bragging about his Rolex in our Slack messages. Instagram posts of him at a Cancun resort, paid for by the company. Court day arrived. I walked in and saw Brad sitting there, grinning like he had already won. He had a fancy lawyer with him, the kind who charges $500 an hour. Brad started talking first. He painted a dramatic story. Told the judge how I had recklessly spent company money, how I had mismanaged projects, how I had sabotaged deals. I said nothing. I just waited. Then, my lawyer pulled out the stack of documents. One by one, he went through each transaction. Mr. Brad, can you explain this $12,000 business retreat in Cancun? We have your Instagram post from that trip. No clients were there. Silence. And this $5,500 watch purchase? You wrote, treating myself, in our company Slack. Silence. $3,000 for bottle service in Miami? His lawyer shifted in his chair. Brad turned red. His jaw tightened. Then his own lawyer leaned over and whispered something. I saw Brad's eyes widen. That's when I knew. He hadn't told his lawyer any of this. His lawyer sat back, rubbed his temples, and said, Your Honor, may we have a short recess? The judge frowned. You may not. Then he turned to me. Do you have anything else to present? I nodded. And I wasn't finished yet. Brad was sweating now. His lawyer looked furious. It was clear he had no idea about half the stuff I had just handed to the judge. But I wasn't done. I turned to my lawyer, who nodded and pulled up a final document. An email, from Brad, to our accountant. Subject, need a favor. In it, Brad had asked the accountant to adjust some numbers in the books. He wanted expenses moved around to make it look like I had spent company funds. There was no way out of this. He had tried to frame me. The judge's face went stone cold. Brad's lawyer, who had been fighting for him all morning, suddenly looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. For a long moment, there was silence. Then the judge spoke. Mr. Brad, do you have an explanation for this? Brad opened his mouth. Then closed it. Then opened it again. But no words came out. The unexpected twist. Just when I thought this was the worst of it, Brad's lawyer stood up abruptly. Your Honor, he said, clearing his throat, I'd like to request a withdrawal as counsel. The entire courtroom turned to look at him. Even the judge raised an eyebrow. I beg your pardon, the judge asked. Brad's lawyer sighed. I can't represent a client who withheld key financial records from me and engaged in fraudulent activities. Brad's face went sheet white. No, wait. He turned to his lawyer, panicking now. You can't just, but the lawyer just packed up his briefcase and walked out. Brad loses control. Brad was officially alone. No lawyer. No backup. No plan. He turned to the judge, stammering. I didn't know about that email. That wasn't me. I didn't, the judge held up his hand. Enough. I thought this was it. I thought this was where Brad would finally be held responsible. Then, out of nowhere, Brad snapped. He stood up, slammed his hands on the table, and started yelling. This is your fault. He pointed a shaking finger at me. I just stared at him. Excuse me? Brad's face was red, his voice rising. You ruined everything. You left. You abandoned the company when we were growing. If you had just stayed, none of this would have happened. I was stunned. The audacity. You stole from the company, I said, my voice calm but sharp. You spent every dollar we earned on yourself. You tried to frame me. And now you're blaming me for leaving? Brad lost it completely. He started ranting, eyes wild. How do you think I felt, huh? Watching you drive that shitty Honda Civic while I was out there trying to make us look successful? His words echoed in the courtroom. Silence. Then, slow clapping. Not from me. From the back of the room. We all turned. The final blow. There, sitting in the last row, was our former accountant. The same accountant Brad had tried to manipulate. She stood up, holding a file. I was hoping I wouldn't have to come up here, she said, walking forward. But since Brad wants to lie to a judge, I think I should share what I have. The judge motioned her forward. She handed a stack of documents to the clerk. Bank records, she said simply. Including payments Brad made to himself under fake invoices. Brad sank into his chair. I could almost hear his soul leaving his body. I watched as the judge slowly flipped through the pages, his expression growing harder with every line. And that's when I realized, Brad was about to go down harder than I ever expected. The judge flipped through the bank records page by page. His expression darkened with each one. Brad looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. I sat back and watched. I wasn't going to say another word. The evidence was speaking for itself. But just when I thought this was as bad as it could get for Brad, things took a turn I never saw coming. The accountant's bombshell. The accountant cleared her throat. Your Honor, there's something else. Brad's head snapped up. His hands gripped the table like it was the only thing keeping him upright. I was subpoenaed last week for financial records, she said, glancing at me. I assumed it was for this case. She turned back to the judge. But then, the IRS showed up at my office. The room went silent. The judge stopped flipping pages. The IRS? Brad's entire body tensed. What are you talking about? He blurted. The accountant didn't even look at him. I thought it was odd, she continued, so I asked why. They told me your company had been flagged for an audit and possible tax fraud. I felt my heart skip a beat. Tax fraud? I hadn't been part of the company for months. If Brad had been cooking the books, I had nothing to do with it, but I wasn't about to get dragged into it. Brad looked like he'd seen a ghost. She's lying, he shouted, voice cracking. This is an attack. A setup. The judge raised a hand, cutting him off. Sir, you will remain seated. Brad's mouth snapped shut. The accountant kept going. I didn't know much at first, she admitted. But after speaking to the IRS agents, I started putting pieces together. That's when I found this. She pulled one last document from her folder. A wire transfer record. A large wire transfer. Made from our business account, to an account under Brad's personal name. Brad finally lost it. He jumped to his feet. That was a mistake. The judge banged his gavel. I said remain seated. Brad froze. Then he slowly sank back into his chair, breathing hard. My lawyer leaned toward me and whispered, this just became a criminal case. Brad had committed bank fraud. And the IRS was already onto him. The secret business account. The accountant handed the judge the wire transfer details. As you can see, she continued, this wasn't just a one-time thing. Mr. Brad had been skimming money from the company into his personal account for months. Brad shook his head wildly. No, that's not true. But the accountant wasn't finished. She reached into her bag one more time. And pulled out a second folder. I also found another account, she said. One he didn't think I'd be able to trace. Brad's face drained of color. I sat up straighter. What? I was going through transaction logs, she continued, opening the folder, and I noticed a pattern. Certain invoices didn't match up with any actual work done. When I dug deeper, I found a hidden bank account registered under a shell company. She turned to the judge. That company was owned by Brad. Oh. My. God. Brad had been paying fake invoices to himself. That's why the business had been losing money so fast. It wasn't just lavish spending, he had been actively stealing from the company. I had spent years working my ass off, wondering why we were always tight on cash. Turns out, Brad had been lining his pockets the whole time. The judge looked at Brad, his expression unreadable. Do you have anything to say, Mr. Brad? Brad just sat there, completely frozen. For the first time since this case started, he had no words. The unraveling. My lawyer leaned in again. This is bigger than just your case now, he whispered. And he was right. The judge sighed and turned to the bailiff. Make copies of all these documents, he ordered. We will be sending them to the proper authorities. Brad's eyes snapped to me. You set me up, he hissed under his breath. I laughed. A real, genuine laugh. I didn't do anything, I said, my voice calm and steady. You did this to yourself. But Brad wasn't done fighting. He suddenly lunged across the table, pointing a finger at me. This is your fault. If you hadn't left the company, if you had just done your job, none of this would have happened. The judge banged the gavel again. Mr. Brad, you are dangerously close to contempt of court. But Brad was spiraling now. His entire defense had collapsed. His lawyer had abandoned him. He had been caught in fraud, embezzlement, tax crimes, all in one day. And then came the final twist. The courtroom doors opened. A man in a suit walked in. He had a badge clipped to his belt. He whispered something to the court clerk, who nodded and stepped forward. "Your Honor," the clerk announced. "There is a federal agent here who wishes to speak with you regarding an ongoing investigation into Mr. Brad's financial dealings." Brad turned white as a sheet. He finally realized what was happening. This wasn't just a business dispute anymore. This was becoming a federal case. And from the look on the agent's face, they already had enough to take him in. And just like that, Brad's world collapsed. I sat back. And I waited. Because I had a feeling. This was far from over. Brad sat there, completely motionless. His face had gone from pale to ashen gray. The courtroom was silent, except for the occasional shuffle of papers and the barely contained whispers from the people sitting in the audience. The federal agent stepped forward, speaking quietly to the judge. I couldn't hear what was being said, but I didn't need to. I knew what was coming. This wasn't just a civil case anymore. Brad was about to be hit with criminal charges. The final explosion. When the judge looked back at Brad, his expression was stone cold. "Mr. Brad, I advise you to remain silent from this point forward." That was it. That was the moment he broke completely. Brad shot up from his seat, knocking over his chair. "This isn't fair," he shouted. He turned on me, eyes wild, face red, veins popping out of his forehead. "You wanted this. You set this up. You ruined my life." A bailiff immediately stepped in front of me, ready to intervene. But I didn't flinch. I just stared at him. And I said the truth. "You did this to yourself." Brad laughed bitterly, running his hands through his hair. "Oh, shut up. You think you're so righteous, huh? Walking away like some saint while I had to clean up your mess?" I raised an eyebrow. "My mess?" Brad pointed at me, his hands shaking. "You don't get it, do you?" His voice was borderline hysterical now. "I did everything for this business. I was the one making US look successful. I was the one who, you were the one stealing from the company," I interrupted, my voice low. Silence. "Do you even hear yourself?" I asked, standing up slowly. "You blew through every dollar we earned, you took money under the table, you lied to our accountant, and then you tried to frame me when everything fell apart." Brad shook his head violently. "No. You left. That's why the business failed." I took a step closer. "No, Brad," I said. "It failed because you killed it." His mouth opened, but no words came out. Then his eyes darted toward the judge, as if begging for help. There was none. He whirled toward the federal agent, shaking his head. "Look, this is a misunderstanding, okay? I just made some bad financial moves, but it's not fraud. I can fix it." The agent gave him a cold look. "We'll be the ones to determine that, sir." Brad looked around wildly. Searching for someone, anyone, who might defend him. No one did. His own lawyer had abandoned him. The accountant had buried him in evidence. The judge was already preparing his ruling. And me? I was just waiting for it all to come crashing down on him. The moment it all came crashing down, the judge took a deep breath and looked straight at Brad. "This court finds that Mr. Brad is fully responsible for the financial collapse of the company and is liable for all outstanding debts." Brad staggered backward like he had been physically hit. The judge continued. "This court also finds evidence of fraudulent activity, which will be referred to the appropriate authorities for further investigation." Brad let out a broken laugh, his hands shaking uncontrollably. "No way," he whispered. Then louder. "No. No, 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 this can't be happening." The bailiffs moved in. The federal agent stepped closer. And Brad did the one thing I never thought he'd do. He dropped to his knees. "Please," he gasped, looking up at the judge. I can fix this. Just give me time. Let me make it right." The judge shook his head. "You had plenty of time to do that, Mr. Brad." A bailiff grabbed him by the arm. "Sir, please stand." Brad refused to move. Then he turned to me. For the first time, I saw something in his eyes that I hadn't seen before. Not anger. Not arrogance. Fear. "Please," he whispered. I didn't respond. Because there was nothing left to say. The courtroom was a mess of whispers and murmurs as Brad was led away. I watched him go, but I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt done. People came up to me afterward, old employees, former clients, even the accountant, offering words of support. I always knew something shady was going on with him. You didn't deserve this. If you ever start another business, let me know. I nodded, thanked them, but I barely processed their words. I just kept thinking about everything. Years of my life. Gone. A business I built from the ground up. Gone. A partner I had trusted. Gone. I walked out of the courtroom into the cold air and took a deep breath. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for disaster to strike. There was no company to save, no partner to fight with, no chaos to clean up. Just me. Starting over. And for the first time in years. That felt good.